For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Thabi Madiba, researcher and analyst. Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
After allegedly committing more than one assault, Grace Mugabe is allowed to leave the country following a proclamation by Minister of International Relations. Was this correct?
Well, you know, when Grace Mugabe came into the country, she didn't have diplomatic immunity. And that is why after this series of incidents, the Minister of Police said there was a red alert to the effect that they would make sure that she did not leave the borders, and she was supposed to appear in court. He said she'll be in court the next morning, whatever it was, then at this time, then at that time. And then her lawyers, or the embassy, I can't remember which, from Zimbabwe, said that they were negotiating with the Department of International Relations for diplomatic immunity. Now, the department had been the first one to make a statement saying that the spouse of a person who's got diplomatic immunity does not have diplomatic immunity unless they are also there on official business or accompanying the person with diplomatic immunity on official business. That one is not totally clear also, but I think if she had come with Robert Mugabe as part of the delegation for the SADC meeting, then she probably would have had diplomatic immunity. So it was only after this happened that the Minister of International Relations made a proclamation where she said she is exercising her discretion to grant her diplomatic immunity. She said she agonized over this decision and she decided to grant it in the interests of diplomatic relations between Zimbabwe and South Africa, the rule of law, and I can't remember what other reasons. And she did have this right to give diplomatic immunity, but we need to ask ourselves, when she agonized over granting diplomatic immunity, she took a decision to weigh the relations between the two countries as she understood it, or the national interest of South Africa, to not make Robert Mugabe angry and not make Zimbabwe angry if she assumes they get angry with this. She weighed that up more highly than very serious violence allegedly committed against one person, and as a consequence of this, when her one son was running away, he bumped into a pregnant woman who had a miscarriage. So, and there were other assaults that were allegedly carried out on that day. So the Minister of Police had claimed to be taking it very seriously and was apparently appearing to charge Grace Mugabe, but that was overruled. Now, this is part of a wider question. When South Africa won its democratic rule in 1994, the ANC advanced a foreign policy which was intended to be a human rights-based policy. And in other words, the human rights that are in our constitution are meant to inform our foreign policy. If you have a capacity to sell arms, which South Africa has, you don't sell arms to countries that are perpetrating human rights abuses, because our constitution places a lot of weight on human rights. partly because of our history of human rights abuses under apartheid and the desire to turn things around in democratic South Africa. Now, it was always very difficult to implement that because human rights policies can't be implemented in foreign affairs as they can be locally. In South Africa, if you decide tomorrow we're going to change the tax laws, you just do it. But if you want to do it in international relations, you have to do it on a bilateral basis, that is between two states, or on a multilateral basis in cooperation with other states. For example, in this case, there must be an agreement with Zimbabwe, if it's a for international relations matter, that this is the way we handle it. Or if it's in SADC, all the SADC members, or consensus must be to the effect that we will take common action against the human rights violations in Zimbabwe or wherever it happens to be, or in the African Union, or in the international relations in general. Now, in the beginning, in 1995, if I'm not mistaken, the Commonwealth made a decision that Nigeria under General Sani Abacha would be isolated. Immediately, Nelson Mandela declared that the South Africans were going to isolate the Abacha regime. No one else followed. And what was interesting about this, and I think some people in foreign affairs here thought Mandela was naive, but what it reveals is that you cannot make foreign policy successful in terms of, not successful in terms of being morally right, but successful in terms of carrying out some things unless others go along with you. And Mandela followed even the decision of the Commonwealth, but others were not prepared to buy in. And I think when you look at the treatment of Zimbabwe under Thabo Mbeki, many people are very critical about this, but one of the factors that we need to weigh in when we consider the way Zimbabwe has been treated, Zimbabwe is a part of SADC. If South Africa were to want to take a more aggressive stance against Zimbabwe, it would isolate itself probably from most of the region. And insofar as it has multiple relations with Mozambique, Lesotho, all these other countries, has to take that into account. Now, in this case, it was a bilateral matter between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Clearly, the Zimbabwean government brought pressure to let Grace Mugabe go, and they decided that that was the most important thing, not the lives of the woman who was assaulted, the unborn baby that got miscarried, and so forth. And it was telling in some ways that the minister says she agonized, and this is what she concluded.
Can anything be done to bring Grace Mugabe to court?
You see, there's a couple of articles. You may want to post these on the Polity website in the conversation this week. By one is a professor at UJ, the others at Stellenbosch, and they go through what the rules are. And they say there is a discretion, but what is interesting is that you may grant someone diplomatic immunity, but you can also revoke it at a certain point. It doesn't mean that you've granted it permanently. And Grace Mugabe has properties in South Africa that she owns, very expensive properties. So she is going to want to come back. And AfriForum has undertaken to launch a private prosecution against Grace Mugabe. Now, a private prosecution is allowed if the state issues a document saying that they will not prosecute, and the party who wants to prosecute has an interest in the matter. Now this, Ms. Engel has indicated that she does want a private prosecution, and if the state refuses, they can initiate it. And it's easier to prosecute this type of case than, say, the Gupta looting and what have you, because you've got to get an individual who has been harmed to bring the prosecution. And in this case now, the only question really is whether her diplomatic immunity will stand. And it may well be that Mugabe will no longer be with us for a year or two, and someone else comes in as president, and Grace Mugabe will be much more vulnerable if she were to come to South Africa than she is now. So that it takes 20 years for a crime to prescribe. Within 20 years, they can still prosecute her. So that could be one way it could be done. There could also be a civil action. It's not charging her, but suing for the damages. And I think there are ways in which that can be done across borders and things like that. But if I were Grace Mugabe, I would not cross the border so quickly, because who knows what can happen in the near future in South Africa, but also in Zimbabwe. I mean, Robert Mugabe is 93, so he's not here forever. She's angling to try and be president, but it seems unlikely that she will make it. Her power is partly related to Mugabe remaining as president, and if he goes, I think one of the reasons why she bought all these properties is she wants to safeguard her wealth after he's gone. So it's not impossible that she can still be prosecuted at some point, or that civil action can be taken against her. And it is unfortunate that diplomatic immunity, the discretion was used this way. By the way, they can also go to court against the Minister of International Relations and argue that the discretion was not exercised rationally. That's the basis on which one of these decisions of Zuma was challenged, that a decision, you may have a discretion, but you must exercise it rationally. In other words, you could argue, insofar as the Bill of Rights protects the rights of human beings from assault of the sort that was perpetrated, to allow the perpetrator to get diplomatic immunity is subverting the law of the country, and it could be shown to be irrational. That's possible. I don't know.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about Grace Mugabe's diplomatic immunity.